content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior and the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of soil and superstition, exposing a dark chapter in American history where grave robbers, body snatchers, and resurrectionists turned graveyards into a marketplace and a science into something sinister. Tonight, we're visiting with Alan Sircy and his book, Fear and Folklore, An American Grave Robber. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I am your host, Winnie Schrader. And tonight, I kind of wanted to have a little bit of fun, but I mean, it's still kind of gory and strange and weird. But I have author Alan Sircy on, and he's written a lot of the fear and folklore. And this one, we're going to talk about are grave robbers, like grave robber. We're not just talking gold teeth and wedding rings. I mean, it was a big business back then, and it wasn't just, like I said, the jewelry. They wanted the bodies themselves. So, I figured why not have Alan come on and give us the history of how grave robbing started, how it became lucrative, and maybe, I guess, when did it peter off? So, welcome to the show, Alan.
Hey, thanks for having me, Winnie.
Okay, so yeah, your book, Fear and Folklore, Grave Robbers, you delve into that sinister underworld of the weird, the macabre, the strange, and the just of the supernatural. I mean, you kind of you find these histories and stuff with stories of haunted places and things like that. So you kind of came across this by accident by going to the more paranormal route, but then you came across grave digging history. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I did a series of books in the Midwest a year or two ago, and when I was in Cincinnati, I found this story about Benjamin Harrison, the former president, an incident that happened with his family. So, if you're not familiar with Benjamin Harrison, he was a Union general in the Civil War. His grandfather was William Henry Harrison, our seventh president. His father was John Scott Harrison. So, after the war, he moved. He doesn't go to Cincinnati where his family lives, right outside town in North Bend. He goes to Indianapolis to become a lawyer. He wants to become his own man, escape his family's large shadow. So he goes to Indianapolis, becomes this prominent attorney. Well, in 1878, he gets a telegram, hey, your father's passed away. So they're going to lay the congressman, John Scott Harrison, to rest. He goes back to North Bend to the family burying ground, and they have the service there. And at the end of the service, his sister walks over to the corner of the graveyard where her son was laid to rest a week before. Augustus Devlin died from tuberculosis. So she walks over where he was buried, and she starts screaming. Benjamin Harris and the other family members run over to see her, and they realize, hey, the grave's been disturbed, the body's gone. So you can make $20 a day working as a laborer, or $20 a week as a laborer at the docks, or you make $40 one night stealing one cadaver and sell it to the college. So Benjamin Harrison knows, hey, somebody in Cincinnati, one of the schools, came and snatched our nephew. So he tells his younger brother Johnny, his cousin George, hey, you have to go back to Indianapolis to give a speech. He's a rising star in the GOP. So he sends them on this mission to Cincinnati. They leave the next day, and they hire the sheriff to be their liaison in town. So Late at night, they go to the Hagel Medical College right there by the river, and they go to the attic, and there's no electricity. It's oil lamps and candles only. So the sheriff walks over and he sees this shaft in the corner of the room, and there's this rope dangling down. So he walks over and he pulls the line. He's like, "Hang on, boys, the line's taut. Something's on the line." So he finds this wheel, and this dark form in the shadows materializes. So the sheriff said,
Oh,
"Come here, Johnny. Is this your nephew?" So Johnny S. Harrison walks over to the shaft and he holds up his candle and pulls up the shawl. He's like, "Nah, it's just some old bald man." So the sheriff said, "Well, hang on, Johnny. Let's get him out. Let's see." So the sheriff picks him up, lays him on the ground. "Hey, Johnny, take my old lamp. Make sure." So Johnny walks over, pulls back the shawl, holds up his lamp, and he just kind of stumbles back. It's his dad. The grave robbers beat him in Cincinnati in 24 hours. So after
no.
that, they send word to Benjamin Harrison. They got his dad, they got his nephew in the span of a couple of days. He comes to town and it's just scorched earth. But the problem is the administrators don't want to flip on their grave robbers. They have to have a steady stream of cadavers for the students to dissect. So Benjamin Harrison gets there and it's just gridlock. They're butting heads. They refuse to cooperate. So they never really find out. He never finds out who did it. Well, a month before in Toledo, there was a doctor using an alias. His real name was Thomas Beach. He got popped
Mhm.
at graveyards in Toledo. Well, they threw him in the jail, and while he's in jail, he goes to the jailer a couple of days later and says, "Hey, I've got smallpox. Look at my hands. You got to get me out of here." So back then, the smallpox, that is a death sentence for not just you, everybody in the jail. So
Right.
they throw Thomas in the pest house. Well, he wasn't sick. He was just smarter than everybody. He was a physician. He rubbed some kind of oil on his skin, broke himself out. He's the guy that took the body, but they can't catch him. You know why they can't catch him? He's a
What?
spy. So, 1862, Thomas Beach is a 27-year-old kid in England. Civil War is going on in the United States. He wants to come and fight for the Union Army. He comes to
Okay.
America. He enlists in the Illinois Infantry. He fought in the Battle of Nashville, right down the street from me. Well, during that time, you've seen the movie Gangs of New York, the conscription
Yeah.
riots were a thing. Folks up north didn't want to send their kids to the South to die in a war they didn't really care about. So there was
Mhm.
a bill or a law that was passed where you could pay $300 and hire someone to take your kid's place. A lot of Irish immigrants were here and they needed money, and a lot of Irish men took the deal. So while Thomas is embedded and he's fighting, he becomes friends with a lot of guys from Ireland. Well,
Mhm.
after the war, Thomas goes to school, learn to be a doctor, an apothecary, and his buddies from Ireland, they formed this terrorist group called the Fabian Brotherhood and start launching terrorist raids up into Canada. So Thomas, he writes letters to his dad to tell him what his buddies are doing because his dad's in England. Well, his dad takes him to Parliament and he becomes a protected British asset. So as all this stuff's going on and he gets turned up with the Harrison deal, Thomas goes back to England and lays low. He becomes a businessman. He writes the best-selling autobiography about his time and things he did, and he's a hero in England. But here in America, he's a scourge of the earth. He stole the body of the son of a father of the United States president. It's nuts.
Oh my god. It's just like was it more of a religious thing why people, like, did not wanna give their bodies up to science or
Yeah, I mean, it was a
was
very, I mean, I don't say primitive society, but they're very religious, and it's like,
yeah.
um, yeah, years later, like 30, 40 years later, they started donating bodies and stuff like that. But back then, no one ever even crossed their mind, hey, let's donate our body to science.
Right, because yeah, now you can actually dedicate when you die, you can
Yeah,
dedicate your full body to science and studies and stuff like that. I might have them do that 'cause
but the grave robin, it
I
goes.
don't know what they're gonna find underneath this hood, but I got a lot of a jalopy right now, but, um, so now what was kind of did they have, like, a specific, like, I like a you know how they have the unicorn, the greatest find you did they have a specific type? Did they wanna find like, did they get top dollar for, like, younger, muscular men versus younger children? Or, I mean, was there um, kind of like a category?
Well,
Like,
I
did
mean,
they
yes
take
and
orders?
no. I mean, they to kind of be under like 60 or 70, and they also like a minimum. They only needed a few children each year. Like there are, I found this story in Indianapolis. A guy named Rufus Cantrell. They called him the King of Ghouls. He worked with another guy who would go out scouting the graves, and he would leave like pieces of coal on markers of children because if
Yeah.
the county or if the hospital already had so many children for the year, you saw a piece of coal on the grave marker and you just left it alone. You just kept going. And also, in a funny twist, Benjamin Harrison, the president whose father, the whole Harrison deal, when he finally died, Rufus Cantrell was going to steal his body, hold it for ransom. Well, when he went to go take his body, someone put a piece of coal like the market for children, saying, "Hey, you need to skip this one," because he was trying to warn him that people were watching the grave.
Mhm. Gotcha. It's such a weird thought to just like, I don't understand, did anybody think to ask about donating bodies? Or, I mean, did they just immediately go to grave robbing? Because I understand the need for them to study the human body.
Hmm.
Medicine was very primitive at that time, and if we didn't have those grave robbers stealing all those cadavers, would we be where we are today in medicine? You
Yeah,
know,
I
it's
don't know. I mean,
kind
like,
of like a double-edged sword, you know?
yeah. And like even like in the 1700s, there were riots in New York. There were riots in St. Louis. They had riots in Connecticut. They were just where people would find out about, like in St. Louis, there's some kids playing ball, and the ball went over the
Mhm.
fence. They climbed the fence and went to this medical college. They found this pit of bones. Well, the kids told their parents, and the parents got their neighbors, and they just raided the college. And like the state militia got called in. The mayor's trying to squash, and the medical school's on fire. It's just people found out they're just mad. And they're very religious. They're very primitive in their beliefs. And like you said, no one really thought about donating bodies. It's like if your grandmother died back then, she's a saint. Let's let her rest, with
Mhm.
grandpa and let her rest in peace.
Well, I mean, I even think, they probably thought doing autopsies and cutting up the bodies and things was very sacrilege, you know?
Yeah.
They wanted to preserve the bodies. If I don't need it anymore, you can have it if you want it. You'll probably give it back, but, um, m so now, what was kind of like did they have, like, hot spots? I mean, obviously, the more populated cities held the most cadavers at a morgue or wherever they stored bodies. But, you were doing, it seems like a lot of your cases, they were kind of like in the Midwest. And one thing I do know, at like the Palmer House Hotel in Sauk Center, Minnesota, one of the most historic haunted hotels in America. I love going there, but part of the issue was when the flu outbreak came. I don't remember what flu outbreak it was. We've had so many, but like a lot of people died, and it was during the winter. Well, if anybody knows what it's like in the Midwest midwinter, the ground is rock hard. You can't, break it. And back then, they didn't have bulldozers and stuff. They just had shovels. It was like chiseling through ice. So a lot of times they would store these bodies in the basements of like not hospital or hospitals, churches, hotels, in because the basement stayed so cold that it preserves the bodies until you had the spring thaw, and then you go bury everybody. But I don't know, did you kind of see like a pattern, like which kind of big city was had the most cadaver
I mean, it was
stealing
all
activity?
where the schools were. I mean, it went on in places like Chicago, St. Louis. It happened in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It doesn't really matter how big the school
Uh-huh.
is or the cities. Like if you had schools, you'd have cadavers. But something you mentioned kind of jogged my memory. There was a guy named Ernest Doebke in St. Louis, and he was smart. He bought a whole bunch of acreage in a cemetery, and he would charge people $7 to bury children, $9 to bury adults. Well, he was double dipping. He was getting money to bury them, but he wouldn't bury them. He would just take them to the college.
Oh, I
Other
don't mean to laugh, but that's innovation.
Well, the thing is, though, in St. Louis, I think it's in the 1870s, 1880s, there was no law on the books for stealing the body. Body's worthless. So how do
Yeah.
you make it stop? Well, they finally caught him and they charged him with stealing a rosewood coffin. Well, Ernest had a lot of money from all his exploits over the years. He hired a good attorney. Well, the rosewood coffin they accused him of stealing, his attorney found out it was a pine box that was painted like rosewood, and he got off on a technicality. So it's nuts the things they did. It's like the shenanigans are off the charts because there's just so much money you can make.
Right. I know shenanigans amok. I mean, yeah, they're it's bait and switches and now, okay, so like let's say Because a lot of these grave robbers, they were kind of, the hired guns, the kind of dingy part of society. Now, did like these colleges when they would hire these grave robbers to go and get cadavers, did they like let them keep like any jewelry or like gold teeth or like little tips and trinkets, or did these colleges want everything?
Well, by the time they took the bodies to the college, they weren't looking for jewelry because it was already gone. The body snatchers would took whatever. But yeah, they just wanted the bodies. They weren't really concerned with jewelry. And yeah, these guys are poor. They're scrappy. They would take the any jewelry they had and just pocket it really big.
Mhm.
And typically, you got a body, and each college had like a shaft or like a back door, and you would put it in the back door or shaft, and you go back and get paid the next morning. There was a guy named William Cunningham. They called him Old Man Dead. He was in Cincinnati, and he one night he raided the graveyard, and he got 16 cadavers. And like he's thinking,
Mhm.
I'm gonna retire tomorrow when I get paid because he dropped it off. Next morning he goes to get his paycheck, and the professor's like, "Come here, Cunningham." He's like, "Yeah, where's my money?" He's like, "Well, all those cadavers, they all had smallpox. You got to take them back." So he had to go throw them all back in a barrel and take them to the cemetery, and he just dumped them out there in the graveyard because Cunningham believed the sexton kind of did him wrong because the sextons usually were in on it with the grave robbers. They always got a cut of whatever they made.
Mhm. Oh, I know. And, like, you hear our kids, like, complaining about their hours that they have to work at Starbucks. I'm like, these people had no choice, but this was a job so they could feed their family. They had to go dig up bodies, and that's supply and demand, I get it, but man, what an awful way to earn money and have to and, and especially too being Irish. I'm Scots Irish, and religion plays a huge part, and I'm sure that probably, moralistically, weighed heavy on some of these people. I don't know how religious they were, but because it's very sacrilege, especially back then, to
Well,
mess
Cunningham
with the body.
had an assistant named Charlie Keaton, and
Yeah.
he referred to himself as a subject gatherer. He wouldn't call himself a resurrection man or a grave robber or body snatcher. He told his friends and family he was a subject gatherer.
A subject gatherer.
Hmm.
Well, I think they're just trying to find a clinical term to stick so it sounds okay, yeah, let's do it. So it makes it sound so clinical. But we gotta take a quick break, but when we come back, I wanna know if there's like any type of like celebrity grave robbing. Like, has there been any famous recorded cases of grave robbers specifically wanting to get that celebrity's body or, whatever may have been buried with it. There's always those stories in history where so and so was buried with a bag of money and whatnot. But yeah, I'd love to hear about if we have any of those stories, but we've got to take a quick break and we'll be back with Alan Sircy here with his book, Fear and Folklore Grave Robbers. Guess what's back? That's right, the Paranormal 60 swag shop is back. Of course, we have the ever popular Paranormal 60 tees with all the sayings we know and love. Plus, we have new and improved travel mugs, a new improved hoodie, and a brand new product. You gotta rock the croc with the Paranormal 60 foam slip-on shoes. All you gotta do is go to theparanormal60.com, click the swag shop tab at the top of the page. As you can see, this is where you can purchase Dave's book bundle. You can get The Other Side and Theater of the Mind, both signed for just $40. But if you want to go to our swag shop, just scroll up and click the merch button, which will take you to our Paranormal 60 swag shop where you can purchase all the new items and your favorite items all in one place. Thank you so much for all your support. And remember, Darklings, stay spooky. Did you know that radio just got a little extraterrestrial? That's right, Dave Schrader is back on radio with the Paranormal 360 every Sunday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Central on WCCO AM 830 and Odyssey station. Just download the Odyssey app and look for the WCCO logo, follow the station and listen live. That's the Paranormal 360 on WCCO AM 830 and Odyssey station. Hi, and we're back. We have our special guest, Alan Sircy, who wrote the book Fear and
folklore. I don't know why my mouth will not say it today. Folklore. Uh, grave robbers. We're talking grave robbers here. It is a kind of spooky time of year. It's Halloween, it's fall, everything's dying. But before the break, we kind of alluded, has there been any type of like celebrity body snatching or celebrity grave robbing? Like, has there been, uh, uh, maybe some type of lore or legend story or something that so and so is buried with treasure, and he had these grave robbers going and digging everybody up trying to find it?
Yes, yes, and yes. Let's see
Ooh, yeah.
here. Trying to think where to start. Well, Abraham Lincoln's probably the most famous guy that someone has tried to steal his body. There was a gangster in Chicago. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the government was on him a lot, and they arrested his best counterfeiter, and he was mad. And he's trying to think of a way that he could get his counterfeiter back. So he devised his plan. He hired some thugs to go break into Abraham Lincoln's tomb, and he took several weeks
Uh-huh.
to plan it. And he planned it in his bar, and someone got word of someone, and a Secret Service agent got sent in on the case, and they hired him thinking he was like this master horse thief that lived kind of in the area. So they brought him
Mhm.
along, and they didn't know they had a Secret Service agent embedded him with them, but he was there, and they got into Lincoln's tomb in Illinois, and they broke through the mausoleum there, and were in the process of
Yep.
getting the uh, the casket out, but it had so much concrete they had a hard time. Well, another Service agent there, actually, it was a city, I think it was a city cop or someone from the city who came to help stop him. He fired his gun on accident, and then knew the gig was up, and they took off running. A couple of weeks later, they got them all. But yeah, that was Lincoln's probably the most famous. Andrew Jackson, another president
Yep.
here in Nashville by me. There was a guy who was a collector of bones. He liked to collect bones from famous people. I think he's paying like 20 grand. This is back in 1890s, maybe early 20th century. But he hired this guy to go break into Andrew Jackson's tomb at the Hermitage, the historical mansion that Jackson lived in. He's buried back there in the garden with his wife. This guy, he came to take a tour of the mansion, and he kind of loitered around a long time. He left, went and ate lunch, and he came back later in the day. During his second stint at the house, his assistant went over and borrowed a shovel and a spade from another farm that was near the mansion. And they came back that night, and the same thing with the Lincoln deal. There was so much concrete they couldn't get all the way through. But when the caretaker woke up that morning, they saw where they had tried to pick a hole through the concrete and dig out Jackson's bones. And it came out a couple years later. There was a guy who paid, I think a man in Cincinnati paid this grave robber to dig Jackson's bones up because he wanted them for his personal collection.
Why? Like, is that such a weird and odd thing to wanna collect is somebody's bones? It's just like and to pay that kind of money even back then,
Yeah.
that's crazy back then. So, have there been any, like, like, the treasure hunts? Those have always been kind of like in the movies, like grave robbing to find, treasures or clues. I mean, the most famous one of all is Indiana Jones, of course. I mean, technically, he was a grave robber. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. You
What's
know,
funny?
I
It's funny
mean,
you mention that because I did an Alabama book a while back, and I found the story where there was this guy who he's a wealthy farmer in Alabama, and when he was laid to rest in Montgomery at Westcott Cemetery, people kept
Mhm.
breaking into his grave. They thought that he had been buried with a map on his person of where you could find his gold. So every couple of years
Mhm.
there'd be reported people breaking into his grave. Well, back in May, I went down there and I was getting pictures of the cemetery, just general pictures. I don't know where the guy's buried. I walked maybe 30 yards into the cemetery and I look down at my feet and there's a busted open grave. And I was like, what? I look again, like I took a picture of it, and you can blow it up and you can see a human jawbone. It's nuts. And that afternoon I sent the picture to the mayor of Montgomery, Alabama. I was like, hey, I want you to know what I saw at Westcott Cemetery. And they assured me they get it fixed the next day. I haven't been back since, but I'm hoping they did.
Whoa, that would ugh. Like, what do you do? I mean,
Yeah, it's kind of disturbing. You look down like, oh man, there's a human jawbone.
yeah, well, yeah, well, apparently somebody was, had better luck than, Geraldo Rivera with, Al Capone's too, where oh, that's probably one of the biggest well, I mean, I don't know, you would call it grave robbery, but
He's trying to get
Um,
into like a vault, wasn't he?
yeah, it was like they think they call it Al Capone's tomb or vault. I can't remember. I heard both in the news, but yeah, like it was supposed to be this huge, grandiose thing, and they banned it. It was like a Pepsi can, and I mean, like, I couldn't imagine, like, you like, some of these treasure hunters and grave robbers and things like that, they back then, they had to do a lot of research and stuff to find what they needed,
Well, look
you
at Oak
know?
Island, the Legend Curse of Oak Island. They got like what 3 or 4 or 5 seasons of that show. They find a button or a penny like every 2 or 3 years, and it keeps coming back for more. So, yeah.
I know, but it's funny how I mean, we look back in hindsight, it's an awful thing to think of people just kind of not really treating the humanity as sacred as well. I don't even know if we treat it as sacred anymore either, but we hold life, but I guess in a little bit higher regard and more value than what people would die back then. They'd just drop like flies, and they were just like whatever. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting to see that you had all these sects of grave robbers, but they all had to do the same job, but all of them for different purposes. Like some people wanted to grave rob for treasures, money, things of value, versus somebody else was wanting it for more of a medicinal reason, like colleges. So it's like you're finding all these people, and you're just kind of putting teams together. The original A team, I have. That's how I'm kind of I'm picturing these guys. It's like the A team of grave robbing. This is like they're putting teams together. That's hilarious.
Well, it's funny. Like I mentioned,
Um,
Rupert Cantrell, the guy in Indianapolis. He uh,
yeah.
he he was he was in the army. He washed out of the army, moved to Indianapolis, and he was just a poor black guy in like 1880. And there's not a lot of opportunities for people like that back then. So there was
Mhm.
another guy similar to him, at least a little bit older, and he was kind of like a criminal. He was a body snatcher, and he showed Rufus the ropes, like taught him how to be one of the best resurrection men in the country. Well, one night Rufus decides he wants to be the guy. So they kind of divided up
Mhm.
Indianapolis east and west. But one night they go to a cemetery in this other guy's part of town, and it's like they have this big brouhaha and they just have this big brawl. And Rufus comes out on top and like banishes this other grave robber and his crew, and like, okay, you guys are done. Indianapolis is mine now. So like, they became the A team.
Wow. They got territorial.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this is like gangland stuff, man. Wow, I didn't realize cadavers were that hot of a commodity.
I mean, yeah. If you make $40 in one night, that's $1,300 roughly in today's money. So it's a whole lot of money to make.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize, like, how lucrative like, uh, yes, giving a guy $40 for, a cadaver, yeah, he could probably get that in 20 minutes for you know what I mean? It's like especially, like I said, in the Midwest, we had like, they would have hotel basements stacked with bodies just wrapped up, I don't know what special wrapping they have, but, I'm sure it was probably and I'm sure probably some of these hotels during the winter or some of these storage places may have lost a few. I'm positive that probably have happened.
Well, I've had a story
Um,
in Chicago. The law enforcement was really cracking down on body snatching, and they had extra watchmen stationed in the cemeteries. Well, it's this
oh,
one
okay.
guy, I can't remember his name, he was real opportunistic. He started raiding the morgues of the insane asylum because
Uh-huh.
you had a handful of guys die every day over there, and they stick them in the asylum, wait for someone to come claim them. I think he got 8 bodies in one night by going where the cops weren't looking.
My god. That's nuts.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, being in I'm with it being the spooky season, I wanna kinda touch base on the paranormal. Have there ever been any kind of, like, legend and lore, stories that have passed down through the centuries of any type of grave robbing that as they were digging up the body, something supernatural happened or a ghost
Well,
popped out or
there's some stories come to mind. There was a guy in Syracuse, New York. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was a professor and he would get his students to go out with him at night and form this group. They call them the League of Body Snatchers, and they would go out. It's like a superhero group. They go out and they would raid the graveyards. Well, one night the kids start digging up this grave, and they hear like a thumping, and it's a woman. So, like, what do they do? So the professor walks over with his revolver and goes to the glass, boom, puts a bullet through the lady's brain, and like make sure she's gone.
Oh my God. So it
There's
wasn't like they were.
Yeah,
Oh.
they made sure she was gone. Yeah, there's a story in Chattanooga. There was a guy, I think his name was Todd Curry or Rod Curry. Yellow fever hit all the port towns or river towns like Chattanooga, New Orleans. Well, like it was a big, like thousands of folks died. Well, this one guy got yellow fever, and he wasn't dead. He's had like hardly any pulse at all. Well, the doctor assumed he was dead, and they buried him in a potter's field, which is where the poor people were buried. Well, a few hours later, the sun goes down. A group of gang robbers over there hears like a thumping on his casket, and they pull the lid off. He just takes off running, runs down the
Oh
street
my God.
tavern where he'd been working to tell his boss what had happened and why he missed work that day.
Oh. He had to tell his boss why he was. That's kind of occupied. Oh my gosh, that's nuts. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've always my actual my I want to say it was like my great grandma, one of my great grandmothers. I don't know. Is when in the mid 1800s, in late 1800s, they did a lot of the wake.
yeah,
Yeah, people would put bodies on display in the home.
yeah.
Um, and so like people would come over, they'd have the casket, they'd have it like in the main living room. People would come pay their respects, and the body would sit there, and then the next day they would have the funeral procession and bury the body. Well, apparently they weren't really focused on checking really well if people were really, really dead because she was put in the coffin. And this was back when people were poor. They just didn't embalm the bodies. They just, cleaned them up, dressed them, put them in a casket, and put them in the ground.
Mhm.
And so she just apparently in the middle of the night, she sat up, got out of the coffin, sat in her chair, started knitting her I can't remember if she was knitting or a wedding or fixing a wedding dress or knitting something. It was something white. And then she eventually died in the chair. So then
Hmm.
they just put her back in the coffin. But I'm like,
Get back in there, Granny.
well, I mean, can you imagine coming downstairs and the body's not where you left it?
That's pretty wild.
And yeah, so but I guess that happened a lot. And that's where the whole bell tolling comes to be is, to whom the bell tolls. They would have the grave watchman or whatever you'd want to call them. I'm sure there's different terms for them, but they would be there and kind of watch over the cemetery at night. And there were times people were buried alive by accident. It wasn't on purpose,
Mhm.
but so coffins were retrofitted with the string built into it, and it would go up into on top. And that's why you always see some of those old tombstones with the little bells.
Yeah,
That's what that is, and you yank if you woke up in your coffin, you were alive, if you were a graveyard shift and you heard a bell, you better dig out them quick because they're alive. I mean,
yeah,
could you imagine though
yeah.
walking through
Yeah,
cemetery and hearing that?
they tie the rope around your toe, so that way if you move your foot, that's how you ring the
Oh,
bell.
was it the toe?
I
I know
believe.
I've heard yeah, I heard some like because I've actually seen some of the coffins, like some of 'em got preserved up here because of how cold it was. So it's like it petrified the wood, so like but so like the string was still there, but like you see like in the coffins how retrofitted throughout the coffin with the string. I'm like, that is such a weird insurance policy. I would oh my God, I couldn't
Well, there's a
imagine. But
story
yeah,
in Knoxville, Tennessee. Knoxville had this big rash of grave robbing over like a span of 6 months. So some of these
uh-huh.
undertakers started putting bombs in the caskets. Like they would put advertisements in the paper, "Hey, do you want a bomb for your beloved's remains?" So that way you guarantee that no one would steal their body.
But then their body gets blown up. I mean, is that Is it just because they don't want somebody to have their
Yeah, it's exactly.
family? Okay,
Your
okay.
mother's just saying you don't want to steal her body. I guess I can understand that.
Yeah, I can understand it to a degree, but it's like, come on, she's not using it anymore. um, well, I mean, thank you for coming on. This is kind of lighthearted, and perfect for this spooky season. I mean, we have a lot going on in this country right now. That's a little making people a little edgy. So
Oh,
it's kind of nice to have those breaks and laugh, and hopefully on the other side of the selection, we'll still come out as a strong country no matter what. And
like some good news
hopefully,
to drink, Robin, to lighten the mood.
let's not get we don't want to get back to grave robbing as a career. So, well, thank you so much. Now, is there a website or anything that people can get a hold of you?
Yeah,
Or
uh,
check out all your books?
yeah. SouthernGhostStories.com. All the books are on Amazon. You can type my name, Alan Sircy. I'm on Twitter, X, Facebook. I do all that.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll have a link in today's description for specifically grave robbing. But yeah, I'll even link your author's page because yeah, you have quite a few books. I mean, granted, being in the paranormal field, it's never a dull moment, and there's always a topic to touch on. But I'm really happy that because you came across Dave at an event recently. I can't remember which event because he's been gone every week. um but yeah, he came across grave robbers. He's like, you should totally get him on the show for that. I'm like,
Yeah.
awesome. Perfect. So, well, thank you so much. And I hope to see you guys all next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.